So now that we have taken a closer look at what dependency services are going to help us with and the 3 steps that we need to perform, let's go ahead and start with the first step, which is simply to create the interface that is going to eventually be implemented per platform on Android and iOS. And of course, if you are supporting Windows, that can be done as well. So what I will do just to keep my code a little bit more ordered is create a brand new folder that is going to be interfaces. And in my interfaces folder, I am going to add a new file. I am going to be creating this as an empty class. Of course, this is not going to be a class, this is going to be an interface, but I'm going to be creating an iShare interface. Of course, if you have ever used interfaces, you know that it is a very good practice to start their name with an I, so it's easy to understand that this is actually an interface. And of course, the first thing that I have to change here is the fact that this is not a class, this is an interface, and hence it has no type of implementation in its members. So basically, what the interface is going to do is set how a class should be structured. It's going to define all of the members that a class will have to have. So it's important to make the distinction in here with the definition and the implementation. Normally, when we have any class, and let me navigate to one of the classes that we have created, we have the definition and the implementation pretty much in the exact same line of code, so we make no distinction between them. We can say that we define a method and that we implement a method, and we usually, or at least in my case, maybe making a mistake, but I refer to them as if they were the same thing when they are actually not. The definition is one thing, the implementation is another. So the definition of a method, let me go ahead and take a look at one of these methods, would be something like this. So this is a definition. This is the implementation. Now, of course, I make the distinction because in the interfaces, it is where we would define the methods. There is no implementation because in the interface, we are not setting how they are going to work. We don't really care how they're going to work, we just care that they exist. So let me go ahead and define a method in here. Now, because of how we're going to be implementing this will have to be a task, but this doesn't have to be the case in all of the scenarios. This could be just void or string or just define the method like that. But because of what we're going to be doing in the next couple of lectures, this has to be a task. And this task is simply going to be called, let's say, show. And what we're going to be doing, by the way, and the reason why I call this iShare, is share maybe kind of like a report of how much money we're spending per category. So continuing with the same application, we have a list of categories, how much is being spent on each of them, the percentage. So we will want to share that to other applications. And that is something that will have to be implemented by platform. So we will need a show method that is later going to be implemented per platform. So what we're going to need is first a string with the title of the message that we want to share. Maybe a string with the message itself, what we want to share. And maybe more importantly is going to be a file path. So this file path eventually will contain maybe a PDF, maybe a TXT, some sort of file with the report of what we are spending per category. And so by defining this method, we are setting that any class that dares to implement the iShare interface will absolutely have to contain a show method that is a task that receives these 3 strings. Which means that here on our Expenses app project, we can simply create an instance of iShare and be certain that it contains a show method that requests 3 strings, with no regards of what the show method actually does. It will have its own implementation on Android, its own implementation on iOS. The shared project is not going to care about how that implementation is made. It is just going to care that the show method exists and that it receives these 3 strings. Whatever the implementation does with that, it's problem of the implementation. The interface again is just defining the method. So we're going to make sure that the method actually exists. And so what we're going to do then is make the implementation on Android, make the implementation on iOS, but from the shared project, call the show method, not from a class, but from an interface. So for example, let's say that we're going to be sharing, and this is actually true from the expenses VM. We're going to be sharing from here. So what I'm going to do is right away, we're still not going to be calling this method, but I'm going to have a public void share report method. And what the share report method is going to do is define a new iShare variable. And of course I need a using directive, and I'm going to be defining this as share. And eventually this share is going to contain that show method. And again, I'm not going to care where this method was implemented or how it was implemented. I just care that it is going to be receiving 3 strings, no matter what the implementation is like. Now, of course, I'm missing something in here, and that is that I have to assign this to something. And that is something that we're going to take a look at in the next couple of lectures, when we actually create classes that implement this interface. We will be able to set this share variable, something similar, to an actual object, but still defined as an iShare, an interface. So the classes that implement this interface could even have more members, more properties, more methods. I am just going to care that they contain this particular method and that it receives 3 strings. So starting in the next lecture, we're going to start to implement this interface on Android and iOS, so we can start to work with dependency services and registering those dependency services to perform the entire dependency injection that I talked about in the previous lecture.